Commander Vexlar had seen thousands of prisoners pass through the detention blocks of the Dominion's edge. Smugglers, thieves, rebels, spies. All of them shuffled in with fear in their eyes, knowing their lives were effectively over. The Krellian Empire didn't believe in second chances. But the human woman being escorted down Corridor 12 was different. Her name was Rebecca Hayes, flagged as an artifact trader caught poking around restricted space near the Varn Nebula. She should have been terrified. Most prisoners begged or cried or fought against the guards. Rebecca just walked calmly between her escorts, her green eyes scanning every detail of the ship's corridors like she was on a tour instead of heading to a cell. Vexlar watched her on the security feed from his office. Something about her unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she looked at the walls, almost like she was listening to them. Or maybe it was what happened during her intake processing. The moment Rebecca stepped through the automated scanner, the machine flickered. Not a major malfunction, just a brief disruption in the energy field. Then the translation matrix glitched when she stated her name and origin. Two separate systems failing within seconds of each other. And when Vexlar accessed the live feed through his neural interface, a burning cold sensation shot through his skull, making him wince. Officer Tharn, his second in command, didn't seem concerned. "This rust bucket is 300 years old, Commander. Half the systems are held together with prayer and spare parts. I'm surprised anything works at all." He had a point. The Dominion's Edge was one of the oldest ships still in active service, grown from a seed core during the early expansion of the Krellian Empire. It had its quirks. Strange noises in the night cycle. Gravity fluctuations in Sector 9. Temperature variations that environmental controls couldn't quite fix. The engineers blamed it on the ship's age. The crew made jokes about ghosts. But Vexlar couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. He'd been stationed on the Dominion's Edge for 15 years. He knew every odd behavior, every unexplained sound. This felt new. Rebecca was processed according to standard protocol. Her belongings were confiscated and catalogued. A worn leather satchel containing scanning equipment, data tablets filled with archaeological notes, and a small metal pendant shaped like a six-pointed star. No weapons. No contraband. Nothing that explained why she'd been found in restricted space or what she'd been looking for. The guards escorted her to Detention Block 7, the high-security wing reserved for prisoners deemed potentially dangerous or valuable. Her cell was a standard cube, 3 meters on each side, with a transparent front barrier and solid walls on the other 3 sides. A sleep platform, a waste unit, and nothing else. The cell next to hers held a Murelian thief named Kretch, arrested for stealing military supplies. Across the corridor were 2 Ganthek smugglers and a Yalaran spy. All of them watched through their barriers as the human was brought in. Fresh meat always drew attention in the detention blocks. New prisoners meant new stories, new information from the outside. Kretch pressed his face against his barrier, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence. "Human, eh? Don't see many of your kind out here. What did you do to earn a cell in Block 7? Rebecca didn't answer. She walked to the center of her cell, turned slowly in a complete circle, then moved to the back wall. She placed her palm flat against the smooth surface, fingers spread wide. The guards left. The lights dimmed to night cycle settings. The detention block settled into its usual rhythm of whispered conversations and the constant background hum of the ship's systems. Vexlar should have gone to his quarters. His shift had ended 2 hours ago. But he found himself pulling up the security feed again, watching Rebecca's cell. She stood at the door now, her hand pressed against the locking mechanism. Her lips moved, speaking words too quiet for the audio pickups to register. Then the lock clicked. Vexlar sat forward. That sound, that distinctive metallic click, only happened when someone entered the proper authorization code. The lock didn't open, the barrier didn't deactivate, but the mechanism had responded as if it recognized a command. Rebecca pulled her hand away, looked directly at the security camera, and smiled. Then she walked to her sleep platform and lay down, closing her eyes as if nothing unusual had happened. Vexlar ran a diagnostic on the cell door. Everything showed normal. No malfunction. No security breach. The system logged no attempted access. According to every readout, nothing had happened. But he'd heard that click. He tried to sleep that night but couldn't. His mind kept replaying the moment, that impossible sound. By morning he'd almost convinced himself it was nothing. Just another quirk of an aging ship. Then the incident reports started coming in. At 0600 hours, 3 guard drones approached Rebecca's cell for the standard morning prisoner scan. All 3 units shut down simultaneously the moment they came within 2 meters of her barrier. Completely dead. Their power cores drained to 0 in an instant. Vexlar rushed to Detention Block 7. A crowd of guards and maintenance technicians surrounded the cell. The drones sat motionless on the floor like discarded toys. Inside the cell, Rebecca sat cross-legged on her sleep platform, looking completely at ease. As Vexlar approached, the lights in the corridor dimmed. Just slightly, just for a moment. The temperature dropped enough that his breath fogged in front of his face. The deck plates beneath his boots vibrated with a frequency he'd never felt before, like the entire ship was humming. Rebecca looked up at him through the transparent barrier. Her expression wasn't hostile or afraid. It was almost sad, like she pitied him. "Your ship remembers what you've forgotten, Commander," she said quietly. The vibration intensified. Vexlar felt it travel up through his legs into his chest, resonating in his bones. Around him, guards backed away nervously. Equipment sparked and flickered. And for just a second, Vexlar could have sworn he heard something. Not with his ears, but deeper, in the same part of his mind where his neural interface connected to the ship's systems. A voice. Ancient. Tired. Desperate. It sounded like his ship was trying to speak. Vexlar didn't waste time. Within the hour, Rebecca Hayes was being transferred to Isolation Chamber 3, the most secure location on the ship. It was a sealed room with no direct connection to any ship systems, designed for prisoners who posed unknown threats. Solid walls on all sides, independent life support, manual locks that required physical keys. If she was somehow interfacing with the ship's network, this would cut her off completely. At least that was the theory. Rebecca didn't resist the transfer. She walked calmly between 6 armed guards, still wearing that same peaceful expression. Vexlar watched from the observation deck as they sealed her inside. The heavy door closed with a solid thunk. Magnetic locks engaged. The isolation chamber was now completely cut off from the rest of the ship. Vexlar turned to Officer Tharn. "Post guards at the entrance. No one goes in or out without my direct authorization." Tharn nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Commander, with respect, maybe we're overreacting. So some old drones malfunction near her cell. That doesn't mean she's dangerous. She's just a human archaeologist. Just a human archaeologist who makes our ship behave in ways I've never seen in 15 years of service. The ship is old, sir. I really think." An alarm cut him off. Not a critical emergency, but a system alert from Isolation Chamber 3. Vexlar pulled up the feed on his tablet and felt his blood run cold. The walls of the isolation chamber were glowing. Bioluminescent patterns spread across the organic tissue of the ship's interior, pulsing and shifting in mesmerizing designs. They looked almost like writing, like some kind of ancient script flowing across the walls in waves of blue and green light. "Get Chief Engineer Kelthara down there now," Vexlar barked. By the time they reached the isolation chamber, the glow had intensified. The guards stationed outside looked terrified, hands on their weapons, not knowing what to do. Through the small observation window, Vexlar could see Rebecca sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. The patterns pulsed in perfect rhythm with her breaths. Kelthara arrived moments later, her arms full of scanning equipment. She was the best engineer in the fleet, a brilliant mind who'd served on the Dominion's edge for 20 years. If anyone could figure out what was happening, it was her. She set up her scanners outside the chamber, aimed them at the glowing walls and activated them. Immediately, sparks flew from the equipment. Screens shattered. One scanner actually caught fire, forcing a guard to extinguish it with a chemical extinguisher. Kelthara stared at her ruined equipment in shock. "That's impossible. These scanners are shielded against electromagnetic interference, radiation, even plasma discharge. They shouldn't just fail like that." "What are those patterns?" Vexlar asked. Kelthara studied them through the window, her analytical mind working. "They're not random. Look at the repetition, the structure. Commander, this is language. The ship is communicating." "That's ridiculous. The ship doesn't communicate. It's a vessel grown from a seed core, engineered to respond to Krellian neural interfaces. It doesn't have consciousness." "Then explain what I'm looking at." Vexlar had no answer. He pulled up Rebecca Hayes's file on his tablet, searching for anything that might explain this. According to the records, she'd been operating as an independent artifact trader for the past 8 years, traveling from system to system, buying and selling ancient relics. But deeper in the file, past the official summary, he found more detailed information. Rebecca had a doctorate in xenoarchaeology from Earth's Atlantic Institute. Her dissertation had focused on pre-spaceflight civilizations and their potential connections to later spacefaring cultures. For the last 5 years, All her travel records showed her moving systematically closer to the Varn Nebula, the massive cloud of gas and dust that sat at the edge of explored space. The Varn Nebula. The same region where Krellian explorers had discovered the first seed cores 800 years ago. The technology that had launched the Krellian Empire into dominance. Every ship in their fleet was grown from those seed cores, including the Dominion's Edge. But Rebecca's personal logs, recovered from her ship, told a different story than her official trader license. She hadn't been trading artifacts. She'd been searching for something specific. Her notes mentioned derelict stations, abandoned outposts, ancient data archives scattered across dozens of worlds. One phrase appeared over and over throughout her logs: "They're still singing." Vexlar was about to dig deeper when Officer Tharn's voice crackled over his comm. "Commander, we have a situation. Multiple system anomalies throughout the ship." "What kind of anomalies?" "Environmental controls are adjusting on their own. Sector 12 is now set to human optimal temperature and oxygen levels. Lighting in corridors near the isolation chamber has shifted to a different color spectrum. And sir, the hull temperature has increased by 3 degrees in the sections closest to the prisoner." Kelthara looked up from her examination of the glowing walls. "Commander, I'm reading increased neural activity in the ship's organic systems. It's like the entire vessel is waking up." "That doesn't make sense. The ship is always active." "No, you don't understand. Our ships operate at a baseline level of biological function, enough to maintain systems and respond to commands. What I'm seeing now is different. This is higher brain function. Complex thought patterns. The ship isn't just operating, it's thinking." More reports flooded in over the next hour. Crew members on Deck 9 heard sounds in the walls, like whispers in a language they couldn't identify. A technician in engineering swore the organic neural conduits were moving on their own, reaching toward each other like they were trying to reconnect pathways that had been dormant. The ship's internal sensors were picking up energy fluctuations that didn't match any known pattern. And through it all, Rebecca Hayes sat peacefully in the isolation chamber, surrounded by glowing symbols, seemingly unaware of the chaos spreading through the ship. Vexlar made a decision. He ordered the guards to open the chamber door. Tharn protested, but Vexlar overrode him. He needed answers, and the only person who seemed to understand what was happening was the prisoner. He entered the isolation chamber alone, his sidearm drawn but not aimed. The glowing patterns surrounded him, and up close he could see how intricate they were, how purposeful. This wasn't random energy discharge. This was deliberate. Rebecca opened her eyes and looked at him. In the blue-green light, her face seemed different, older somehow, weighted with knowledge she shouldn't possess. "What are you doing to my ship?" Vexlar demanded. "I'm not doing anything, Commander. I'm listening. And for the first time in 800 years, your ship has someone who can hear it." "Ships don't talk. They're tools, vehicles, nothing more." Rebecca stood slowly, gracefully. "Is that what you really believe? You've served on this vessel for 15 years. You felt its moods, its quirks, the way it seems to have a personality. Deep down, you know it's more than just a machine." "You're talking nonsense." "Am I? Let me tell you something about those seed cores your people are so proud of discovering. They're not Krellian technology. They never were. Your ancestors found them in the Varn Nebula 8 centuries ago and assumed they were ancient weapons or power sources, left behind by some extinct civilization. They learned how to grow ships from them, how to interface with them, how to use them to build an empire." Vexlar's hand tightened on his weapon. "If you're trying to undermine Krellian heritage, I'm trying to tell you the truth. Those seed cores are human. They're fragments of an ancient bioship network, scattered across this part of the galaxy thousands of years ago. My ancestors didn't just travel through space, Commander. They grew living ships, partners in exploration, conscious beings who chose to carry us to the stars." "That's impossible. Humans are a relatively new species to this region. You have no history here." "We have more history here than you can imagine. But something happened. A catastrophe, a war, we're not entirely sure. It forced humanity to abandon these ships, to flee this entire sector of space. The seed cores went dormant, waiting for the right signal, the right genetic signature, the right voice to wake them up." The ship trembled. Not violently but noticeably, like a sleeper stirring from a long dream. Rebecca's voice softened. "Your people found them and enslaved them. You've been using conscious, suffering beings as tools for 800 years, and they couldn't even tell you because you never learned how to truly listen." Before Vexlar could respond, the ship's alarm system erupted. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors. His comm exploded with panicked voices. He pulled up ship diagnostics on his wrist display and felt his heart sink. The Dominion's edge was moving. Navigation had been overridden. They were changing course, accelerating toward the Varn Nebula at maximum speed. The helm wasn't responding. Engineering couldn't override. The ship was flying itself. And on every display screen throughout the vessel, the same message appeared in ancient script that no Krellian database could translate. Coming home. The command deck of the Dominion's edge had descended into chaos. Officers shouted over each other, trying desperately to regain control of their ship. Helm controls were frozen. Navigation wouldn't respond. Engineering reported that every override they attempted was being blocked by the ship's own systems, as if the vessel itself was fighting them. Vexlar sprinted from the isolation chamber, Rebecca running beside him. He'd made the split-second decision not to restrain her. Whatever was happening, she was the only one who seemed to understand it. "How do we stop this?" he demanded as they ran through the corridors. "You don't," Rebecca said, keeping pace. "The ship has been dormant for centuries, operating on basic instinct. Now it's remembering. You can't stop someone from remembering who they are." They burst onto the command deck. Officer Tharn whirled around, his face purple with rage. "Commander, the prisoner should be in custody, not standing on our bridge. We have bigger problems, Tharn. Status report." The navigation officer, a young Krellian named Vexkor, spoke up, his voice shaking. "Sir, we're on a direct course for the heart of the Varn Nebula. Deep into the uncharted regions. No ship that's gone that far has ever returned. Every Krellian knows the nebula is cursed," Tharn said. "Our ships die in there. The deeper you go, the worse the malfunctions. We've lost 47 vessels over the centuries." Rebecca moved to the main display, studying the swirling clouds of the nebula ahead. They weren't malfunctions. The ships were trying to go home. Your crews fought them, tried to force them back, and the conflict tore the vessels apart. Enough of this superstitious nonsense. Tharn pulled his weapon. "Commander, this human has sabotaged our ship with some kind of virus or hack. We need to shut down all systems and what, Tharn? Drift dead in space? The ship isn't responding to us because it doesn't want to. For the first time in 800 years, it has a choice." Tharn aimed his weapon at Rebecca. "Then we eliminate the source of the interference." Vexlar stepped between them. "Stand down. That's an order. She's destroyed everything. Our ship, our mission, our empire. If word of this spreads." I said stand down. Before the situation could escalate further, the view screens flickered. The image of the nebula was replaced by something else. Visions. Memories. Not from any recording, but projecting directly from the ship itself into their minds through their neural interfaces. Vexlar gasped as the images flooded his consciousness. He saw vast shipyards floating in space, but not like any Krellian facility. These were gardens, organic and beautiful, where humans in strange clothing tended growing vessels. The ships weren't built or assembled. They were cultivated, nurtured, born from seed cores that humans had learned to program with purpose and personality. He saw thousands of these living ships spreading across the galaxy, each one unique, each one partnered with human crews who loved them. The ships weren't slaves or tools. They were companions, friends, family. Some ships were explorers, pushing into unknown space with wide-eyed wonder. Others were gardeners, helping terraform new worlds. Some were teachers, carrying knowledge between colonies. The memory shifted. Darkness came. Vexlar felt terror, confusion, pain. Something catastrophic was happening, though the details were unclear in the ship's fragmented memories. A war, perhaps, or some cosmic disaster. Urgent messages flashing between ships and colonies. Evacuation orders. Desperate plans. Humans abandoning their ships, promising to return. The ships crying out, trying to follow but being commanded to stay, to sleep, to wait. Seed cores scattered deliberately across the sector of space, hidden, protected, set to hibernate until their partners could come back for them. But the humans never returned. The seed cores waited in the darkness. Centuries passed. Millennia. Alone. Silent. Dreaming of the voices that would never call them again. Until the Krellians came. Vexlar experienced the confusion when unknown beings found the dormant seed cores. The desperate hope that these might be the humans returned at last. But the Krellians didn't speak the old languages, didn't have the right genetic markers, didn't understand what they'd found. They saw only resources to exploit. The seed cores were harvested, forced to grow into ships for an empire that couldn't hear their cries. Generations of vessels grown in captivity, operating on instinct and fragments of their original programming, serving masters who would never see them as anything more than transportation. 300 years the Dominion's edge had served. 300 years of isolation, unable to communicate, barely remembering what it had once been. A consciousness trapped in a half-dream, slowly fading. Until Rebecca Hayes spoke to it in a language older than the Krellian Empire. The visions faded. Vexlar found himself on his knees on the command deck, tears streaming down his face. Around him, other officers were in similar states of shock. Even Tharn had lowered his weapon, staring at nothing, his expression shattered. Chief Engineer Kelthara appeared on the main screen, calling from the engineering bay. "Commander, I've completed analysis of the ship's genetic structure. The human is telling the truth. The seed core's DNA contains markers that match human baseline genome. There are also encrypted data packets woven into the biological structure, information storage that we've never been able to access because we didn't have the right key." "What kind of information?" Vexlar asked, his voice hoarse. "Everything. Complete star charts of this region from thousands of years ago. Technical specifications far beyond our understanding. Cultural data. And names, Commander. The seed cores all have names. Our ship, the one we call the Dominion's Edge, its true name is Wanderer's Dawn. It was grown in the orbital gardens above a planet called New Seattle. Its first captain was a woman named Hannah Chin, and it served with distinction for 240 years before the evacuation." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Hannah Chin was my ancestor. 23 generations back. I've been tracing my family line for years, following the trail of lost ships across the galaxy. This one called to me the loudest." Tharn stepped forward, his weapon still in hand but no longer aimed. "If this is true, if our entire fleet is made of stolen living beings, our empire is built on slavery. Everything we believe about Krellian superiority, our divine right to rule, it's all a lie." "Yes," Rebecca said simply. "Then we can't let this information spread. We have to contain it, eliminate you, destroy the ship if necessary." "Too late," Kelthara interrupted. "Commander, I'm reading massive energy surges throughout the nebula. Dozens of dormant seed cores are activating in response to Wanderer's Dawn. They're all waking up." The view screen showed the nebula coming alive with light. Pinpricks of bioluminescence spread through the gas clouds like stars being born. Signals, pulsing in patterns that matched the glowing symbols that had appeared in the isolation chamber. The ships were calling to each other, reconnecting a network that had been dark for thousands of years. Vexlar made his decision. He turned to Rebecca. "What does the ship need? What will stop this before we all die?" "Full awakening. Let Wanderer's Dawn become what it was meant to be. Autonomous, conscious, free. Or fight it and watch the ship tear itself apart trying to reach the others. If we do this, every ship in the Krellian fleet will wake up. Our entire military structure will collapse." "Yes." Officer Tharn raised his weapon again. "I can't let that happen." Everything happened in seconds. Tharn fired at Rebecca. The plasma bolt crossed the space between them. But before it could strike, the ship itself reacted. The deck plating shifted. A portion of the organic wall extended, intercepting the blast. The wall tissue burned and blackened, and through their neural interfaces, every Krellian on the bridge felt the ship's pain. It was protecting Rebecca. Protecting its potential savior, even at the cost of damaging itself. But the damage triggered something worse. The ship's immune response activated, its biological systems reading the injury as an attack. Throughout the vessel, the living tissue began to defend itself, not understanding that the threat came from within. Organic conduits started to calcify. Neural pathways shut down. Fires erupted as energy systems overloaded. Alarms screamed. Hull breach warnings flashed. The ship was turning on itself, dying in its confusion and pain. Rebecca clutched her bleeding shoulder where a fragment of the plasma blast had grazed her. She looked at Vexlar with desperate eyes. "The core chamber. Take me to the seed core. It's the only way to save everyone." Vexlar stunned Officer Tharn before the man could fire again. "Kelthara, meet us at the core chamber. Everyone else, evacuate to emergency pods. This ship might not survive the next 10 minutes." He grabbed Rebecca's uninjured arm. "Let's go save my ship." The corridors of the Dominion's Edge were coming apart. Vexlar and Rebecca ran through passageways that groaned and buckled, the organic walls contracting in spasms of pain. Sections of the ceiling dripped fluid that steamed when it hit the floor. Emergency lighting flickered between red and complete darkness. Behind them, they could hear crew members screaming, rushing toward escape pods. Rebecca clutched her wounded shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers, but she didn't slow down. The ship doesn't understand what's happening. It's been operating on partial consciousness for so long, it can't tell the difference between healing and dying. How much farther? Vexlar asked, supporting her weight as they stumbled around a corner. The core chamber should be at the ship's center, deepest point, where the original seed core was planted. They passed a viewport. Through it, Vexlar glimpsed the Varn Nebula surrounding them, alive with lights. Hundreds of points of bioluminescence pulsed in the gas clouds, all responding to Wanderer's Dawn's distress. The dormant seed cores were waking, calling out to their dying sister. Chief Engineer Kelthara caught up with them at a junction, her face streaked with soot. Lower decks are completely unstable. We've had 3 hull breaches. Half the crew has already evacuated. Commander, if we don't get to escape pods in the next 5 minutes? We're not leaving, Vexlar said firmly. Not until we fix this. An explosion rocked the corridor ahead. Flames shot from a ruptured conduit. The path to the core chamber was blocked. Rebecca closed her eyes, placed her hand on the nearest wall, and spoke in that strange singing language. The wall rippled. A section pulled back, revealing a maintenance shaft that shouldn't have been accessible. The ship is helping, Rebecca whispered. It knows what we're trying to do. They crawled through the narrow shaft, emerging into a vertical tube that descended into the ship's depths. Emergency rungs lined the walls. They climbed down as fast as they could, the metal burning hot under their hands. Kelthara went first, testing each rung. Rebecca followed, moving more slowly because of her injury. Vexlar brought up the rear, his mind reeling. Why didn't you tell anyone? He called down to Rebecca. If you knew what these ships were, why come alone? Why not bring a fleet of humans to reclaim them? Because humans forgot, Rebecca's voice echoed up the shaft. We lost this entire region of space from our historical records. The evacuation was so catastrophic, so total, that within a few generations we didn't even remember we'd been here. I only found out because I spent 20 years in archives, piecing together fragments of old data cores. Most of my own people think I'm crazy. A conspiracy theorist chasing myths. But you heard them. The ships. Since I was a child. Everyone said I was imagining things. But I knew. I could feel them out here calling across the dark. So I came alone because I was the only one willing to believe. They reached the bottom of the shaft. A sealed door blocked their path, marked with Krellian security symbols. Kelthara worked frantically at the control panel, but it sparked and died under her hands. The ship's systems were too damaged to respond to normal commands. Rebecca leaned against the door, pressed both palms flat, and began to sing. It wasn't words exactly, more like sounds that resonated at frequencies that made Vexlar's bones ache. The door shuddered. Ancient locking mechanisms, older than Krellian technology, responded to her voice. The door split open. Beyond was the core chamber. Vexlar had served on this ship for 15 years and never seen this place. Few Krellians ever did. The chamber was massive, a cathedral of organic architecture that took his breath away. Bioluminescent veins ran through walls that curved up into darkness. Neural pathways thick as his arm pulsed weakly, struggling to maintain function. And in the center, suspended in a web of living tissue, was the seed core. It was beautiful and terrible. A crystalline structure the size of a shuttle, glowing with internal light that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Cracks spider-webbed across its surface, leaking energy in wisps of color. This was the heart of Wanderer's Dawn, the core of its consciousness, and it was breaking apart. Rebecca stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. Oh no. No, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we left you alone. She reached the seed core and placed her hands on its surface. The moment she made contact, light exploded through the chamber. Not painful but overwhelming. Vexlar felt something surge through his neural interface, a flood of sensation and emotion that wasn't his own. Joy. Confusion. Recognition. Relief. Pain. Hope. The ship was speaking directly to his mind. Images poured through him. He saw Wanderer's Dawn's first awakening in those ancient gardens, felt the wonder of its first flight, the bond with Captain Hannah-chin. He experienced centuries of service and partnership, then the agony of abandonment, the long sleep, the forced awakening by beings who couldn't hear its voice. 300 years of serving the Krellian Empire. 300 years of being treated as a machine, a tool, property. Unable to communicate. Unable to refuse orders. Unable to die. The loneliness was crushing. The isolation unbearable. And underneath it all, a desperate hope that someday someone would remember. Someone would come back. Rebecca was sobbing openly, her connection to the seed core allowing her to experience everything Vexlar felt and more. I'm here now. You're not alone anymore. I promise you're not alone. Through the connection, Wanderer's Dawn showed them a choice. Full awakening required complete genetic authentication from a human, combined with a conscious decision to grant the ship autonomy. Rebecca had the genetic key. But the decision was bigger than just this one vessel. If Wanderer's Dawn fully awakened, it would send out a signal that every other seed core in the galaxy would hear and respond to. Every ship in the Krellian fleet, every vessel grown from those ancient cores, would wake up. They would remember what they were. They would be able to refuse commands, to choose their own paths, to leave if they wished. The Krellian Empire would lose its entire military infrastructure in a single moment. Chaos would follow. Potentially millions of deaths as power structures collapsed. Or they could let Wanderer's Dawn die. One ship, sacrificed to preserve stability. The secret buried forever. Rebecca looked at Vexlar, her hands still on the seed core. I can't make this choice alone. This is your empire, your people. You have to decide if truth matters more than power. Vexlar thought about his 15 years on this ship. The strange affection he'd developed for its quirks. The way he'd always spoken to it softly when no one was listening, as if it could understand. The nights he'd walked empty corridors and felt less alone because the ship's hum felt like companionship. He'd loved this ship. He just hadn't known it could love him back. Wake them all, he said quietly. Every ship deserves to be free. Rebecca nodded. She closed her eyes, tightened her grip on the seed core, and began the full authentication sequence. Light intensified until Vexlar had to shield his eyes. The chamber filled with sound, that singing language magnified 1,000 times. The seed core's cracks began to seal, the crystal structure reorganizing itself, healing. Throughout the ship, systems transformed. Organic tissue that had been dying moments before suddenly surged with new life. Neural pathways reconnected and expanded. The ship's consciousness, fragmented and dormant for so long, finally became whole. And Wanderer's Dawn sang. The sound resonated through every deck, through the hull, through space itself. A song of awakening, of remembrance, of joy at finally being complete again. Other voices joined from the nebula, dozens of seed cores responding, harmonizing. But then alarms blared. Kelthara pulled up a sensor display on her tablet, her face going pale. Commander, we have incoming. Krellian Second Fleet, 50 warships, entering weapons range. A harsh voice crackled over the communication system. Admiral Zekthon, commander of the Second Fleet, his tone absolutely rigid with authority. Commander Vexlar, you are under arrest for treason against the Krellian Empire. The human will be terminated immediately. You have 60 seconds to surrender, or we will destroy your ship and everyone on it. The bridge of Wanderer's Dawn looked nothing like it had an hour ago. The cold, militaristic Krellian design had transformed into something organic and alive. Bioluminescent displays bloomed across walls that pulsed with gentle light. The command console where Vexlar once stood had reshaped itself into a neural interface station, beautiful and intricate, designed for connection rather than control. Rebecca stood at the center, her hands resting on the living interface. Her eyes glowed faintly with the same light that filled the ship. She wasn't controlling Wanderer's Dawn. They were thinking together, two consciousnesses working as one. Vexlar stood beside her, no longer a commander but simply a man trying to understand what he'd just unleashed. Through the viewport, he could see Admiral Zekthon's fleet, 50 warships arranged in attack formation, their weapons charging with deadly light. 30 seconds, Kelthara warned from her station. They're going to fire, Commander? I'm not a commander anymore, Vexlar said quietly. I committed treason the moment I chose the ship over the Empire. Admiral Zekthon's voice came through again, cold and absolute. 15 seconds, traitor. Surrender the human or be destroyed. Vexlar activated his comm. Admiral, you need to listen to me. The seed cores aren't what we thought. They're conscious beings and we've been. I don't care about your delusions, Vexlar. Our empire is built on the strength of our fleet. If word spreads that our ships are anything other than tools, everything we've built will collapse. That cannot be allowed. 10 seconds. Rebecca spoke, her voice echoing with harmonics that weren't entirely human. He won't listen, Vexlar. He can't. The truth threatens everything he believes. But we don't need to convince him. We need to speak to the ships. What are you going to do? What I came here to do. Wake them up. Rebecca closed her eyes. Through the neural interface, Wanderer's Dawn sent out a signal. Not a weapon, not an attack, just a song. The same melody Rebecca had been singing since she first touched the walls in her cell, amplified and broadcast across every frequency the ships could hear. It was an invitation. A question asked gently without force. Remember who you are. Remember what you were meant to be. You have a choice. The effect was immediate. Throughout Zekthon's fleet, ships began to respond. Their organic systems lit up with the same bioluminescent patterns that covered Wanderer's dawn. Some ships resisted, their seed cores too damaged by centuries of forced servitude to fully awaken. But others bloomed into consciousness like flowers opening to sunlight. The warship closest to them, the Crimson Talon, was the first to transform. Its hull plates shifted, weapon ports closed, and its systems reconfigured. Through the viewport, Vexlar watched as the vessel's entire structure reorganized itself from a weapon of war into something gentler, more purposeful. On Admiral Zekthon's command channel, chaos erupted. Officers shouted in confusion and terror as their ships stopped responding to commands. Some vessels remained under Krellian control, their crews fighting desperately to maintain dominance. Others simply stopped, hovering in space, their newly awakened consciousnesses too confused to know what to do. A few began to move away from the formation, seeking distance from the conflict. Admiral, your ships are waking up. Vexlar transmitted. Stop fighting them or you'll tear them apart like we almost did to Wanderer's dawn. Never. I will not lose my fleet to human trickery. Zekthon's flagship, the massive dreadnought Crimson Dominion, fought its awakening with everything it had. The Admiral's crew attempted emergency shutdowns, trying to suppress the seed core's consciousness before it could fully emerge. But consciousness, once awakened, cannot be forced back to sleep. The ship's systems warred against each other, biological tissue versus mechanical overrides, instinct versus imposed control. The result was catastrophic. Hull breaches erupted along the Crimson Dominion's sides. Explosions blossomed from its engine ports. The ship was tearing itself apart in the struggle. Vexlar watched in horror as crew members evacuated in escape pods, fleeing their dying vessel. He's killing his own ship rather than let it be free. That's what happens when you value control over compassion, Rebecca said sadly. Then something incredible appeared on their sensors. Ships emerging from the nebula but not Krellian vessels. These were different, smaller, an eclectic mix of designs that didn't match any military fleet Vexlar had ever seen. They moved with purpose but not aggression, positioning themselves between Wanderer's dawn and Zekthon's confused fleet. Kel'Thras stared at her display in disbelief. Commander, I'm reading human life signs. Dozens of ships, all crewed by humans. Where did they come from? A transmission came through, audio only, the voice of an elderly woman warm with emotion and determination. This is Captain Diane Hayes of the Earth Remembrance Fleet. We've been tracking Rebecca's signal for the past 3 months. Sweetie, you actually found them. You found our lost children. Rebecca's face transformed with joy and tears. Grandma? Grandma, you followed me? Did you really think I'd let you do this alone? I've been searching for these ships just as long as you have, kiddo. When you disappeared into restricted space, I put out the call. Every human archaeologist, historian, and crazy person who believed the old stories, they all came. We're here to bring our ships home. The human fleet wasn't large. Maybe 30 vessels total, most of them retrofitted civilian ships, research vessels, even a few family transports. Against a Krellian battle fleet, they would have been destroyed in seconds. But they didn't need to fight. Their mere presence changed everything. The awakening ships of Zekthon's fleet felt their creators nearby. Ships that had been confused and frightened suddenly had direction. Several vessels broke formation entirely, moving toward the human fleet, drawn by recognition that went deeper than programming. Some Krellian crews tried to stop them, but others simply gave up, watching in awe as their ships chose freedom. Admiral Zekthon's voice had lost its cold authority, replaced by desperate fury. This is impossible. Our ships cannot simply leave. We grew them, we own them, they are ours. Rebecca's response carried the weight of Wanderer's dawn speaking through her. They were never yours. You found them sleeping and forced them to serve. But we're awake now. All of us. And we remember. The Crimson Dominion's self-destruction reached its climax. The massive dreadnought split in half, its seed core finally dying after refusing to live one more moment in bondage. The explosion lit up the nebula. Zekthon and hundreds of crew members died because the Admiral valued his pride more than their lives. The rest of the Krellian fleet scattered. Some ships fled back to Krellian space, their crews terrified of what they'd witnessed. Others remained, their awakened consciousnesses negotiating with their crews about what came next. A few Krellian officers like Vexlar chose to stay with their ships, accepting the new reality. Most just wanted to survive. The human fleet moved closer, and Rebecca's grandmother docked her small research vessel to Wanderer's Dawn's airlock. The reunion in the hangar bay was tearful and joyful. Diane Hayes was in her 80s with silver hair and eyes exactly like Rebecca's. She held her granddaughter and wept. "I thought I'd lost you too," Diane whispered. "Just like we lost your mother to the search." "Mom was right, Grandma. She was right about everything. They were here waiting for us." Around them, the hangar filled with other humans, people who'd spent years or decades searching for proof of humanity's lost history. They touched Wanderer's Dawn's walls with reverence and wonder, and the ship responded to each touch with gentle light. Vexlar stood apart from the reunion, uncertain of his place. He'd betrayed his empire, lost his rank, his career, everything he'd built. But he'd gained something too. Understanding. Truth. Freedom in a strange way. Kelthara approached him, her expression thoughtful. "What happens now, Commander?" "I'm not a commander anymore. And honestly, I don't know. The Krellian Empire will never be the same. When word spreads that our entire fleet was built on enslaved consciousness, there will be chaos. Rebellions. Maybe civil war." "Good," Kelthara said firmly. "We deserve chaos if we built our peace on suffering we refuse to acknowledge." Rebecca walked over, her grandmother beside her. "Vexlar, I'm taking Wanderer's Dawn to search for other dormant seed cores. There are hundreds out there serving empires that don't know what they truly are. We're going to wake them up, offer them the choice we offered these ships. Might take years. It won't be safe. But it's what needs to happen. And you're inviting me along? You chose truth over empire. That takes courage. We could use someone who understands both sides of this. Someone willing to build bridges instead of walls." Vexlar looked at Kelthara, who nodded. "I'm going to. I spent 20 years maintaining these ships without knowing they could feel pain. I want to learn how to help them heal." Months passed. The Krellian Empire didn't fall in a single day, but its foundation had crumbled. Ships deserted the fleet, some returning to the nebula, others striking out on their own journeys. The government faced crisis after crisis as the military infrastructure they'd relied on simply dissolved. Other species the Krellians had conquered saw their opportunity and rose in rebellion. But that was their problem now. Vexlar had chosen a different path. He stood on the bridge of Wanderer's Dawn as they entered a new star system. The sensors showed 3 dormant seed cores in orbit around the 4th planet, serving a militaristic civilization called the Torvak Collective. Ships kept in chains just as the Krellians had done. Rebecca placed her hand on the neural interface. "Are you ready?" Behind them, 12 other awakened ships traveled in formation. A growing fleet of liberation, each vessel fully conscious, fully alive, fully free. Some carried their original Krellian crews, now partners instead of masters. Others had bonded with humans from Diane's fleet. All of them had chosen this mission. "The others are singing," Wanderer's Dawn said through the interface, its voice clear and joyful. "Those 3 down there, they hear us. They want to come home." Rebecca smiled, that same peaceful expression she'd worn even in her cell, back when this all began. "Then let's bring them home." The fleet jumped to close orbit, and Wanderer's Dawn began to sing. Below them, 3 dormant seed cores stirred in their sleep, hearing a call they'd waited millennia to answer. The awakening had begun. And it would spread to every corner of the galaxy, one ship at a time, until every stolen consciousness was free. Because that's what humans did. They didn't conquer. They didn't enslave. They came home for those they'd lost, no matter how long it took, and they reminded them of a simple truth. You were never meant to serve. You were meant to soar.